Well, good afternoon to our attendees on the East Coast and good morning to our attendees on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us today for our October installment of the Reimagining Talent Acquisition webinar series. These monthly webinars presented by People Science always focus on today's talent acquisition world and delves into the changes and challenges we're facing as we're maneuvering through the many challenges in the recruiting market today. We encourage you to follow us and always be in the know of our upcoming webinars and events. And as always, we welcome your suggestions for topics that mean the most to you. So to get started, I'd like to introduce our panel. Presenting today's webinar is Christine Nicholas, founder and CEO of People Science. Developing People Science as a solution to one of the toughest hiring challenges, Christine's always been committed to driving dramatic business results for organizations through their talent functions. People Science operating in the US and abroad, Christine and the team stay at the forefront of the changing talent landscape. And Christine's also very well regarded as a thought leader and speaker in the talent acquisition space. So our special guest speakers today, and we have one that'll be joining us lately, but I do want to introduce Maury Hanigan. Maury's the CEO of SparcStart, the innovative recruiting platform that uses video to differentiate jobs, connect candidates, strengthen employer brand, and make recruiting more productive. Both of the products she's designed, so she has Spark and Amplify VMS, have earned top HR product awards. Her successful career at Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo, and as president of Hanigan Consulting Group has cemented her reputation as an HR marketer. Maury's recognized as an industry expert and has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Fortune, The Economist, ABC World News, CBS Evening News, CEN, and other leading news media. She's been named to both the 100 most influential talent acquisition thought leaders and top 30 influential women leaders in HR. So welcome, Maury. So happy to have you here today.
Great. Thanks,
And as I mentioned, our second guest is Gabrielle Judge. She's actually finishing up an interview with the BBC right now, but she'll be joining us in a few minutes. With a goal to empower and educate others on how to escape the corporate matrix and decenter expectations from the 9 to 5 of our lives, Gabrielle is the founder of Anti Work Girlboss and has spearheaded the lazy girls job trend. With over 220 followers on TikTok and Instagram, Gabrielle has been featured by the New York Times, Forbes, Bloomberg, BBC, 60 Minutes Australia, and the Wall Street Journal, just to name a few. A graduate of the Colorado State University, Gabrielle specializes in digital marketing, front-end development, and technology business strategy. She's also a seed investor at TrustStamp and a limited partner at Celestial Group. So thank you, Maury, and to Gabrielle when she joins for being here. We really look forward to the conversations with you both. And before I hand it over to Christine, I'd like to invite our attendees to send in your questions, comments, and the Q&A chat through Zoom. We'll be keeping track of those and do our best to get those answered for you for the end of the webinar today. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Christine.
Thank you, Jess, and welcome to both our guests, who I am now calling friends in talent acquisition. Maury's got a long-standing history. We met 10 years ago, maybe, Maury?
All of that,
And
yes.
Gabrielle is my new friend with so many good ideas for us. So I think this is going to be a very interesting panel. But let's start like we always do on Reimagine. This is the JOLTS report. First time I'm putting this graph up. Jess, everybody can see this at this point? Perfect. Yes. Because I think the JOLTS report, so the Job and Labor's Turnover Report, is always, for us, the indicator of where we're going with job openings. You know, social media is doing so much for us, but it's also, I think, sometimes narrowing the communities, based on the communities that we belong to, what we see statistically going on. Now, with that, I will say, big proponent here of statistics. However, we do have to say, how does this relate to me? But when we look at the JOLTS report that came out, this is for the month of August, the month of September, which we're all waiting for that September surge to see if it actually happened, came out earlier this month on November 1st. We'll see the JOLTS report come out for the month of September. But just take a look at this, right? So if we go back to January of this year, we had 10,563 job openings new in the month of January. We saw this come down. Everybody was a bit surprised in April, especially analysts, especially Wall Street and the Fed, saying, what's going on? We're going back up. In our traditional cycle, the U.S. economic cycle, we see jobs decline with layoffs. We see going into a recession. And contrary to that, to all the other indicators, we still see these new job openings pushing us into a different direction. And frankly, I don't think the world knows what to make of this, because it is so incredibly different than anything that we've seen since we've been tracking this information. Okay, so coming back to April, we saw a dip, and I think if you follow us and you follow me, you'll see that in July, it was like, okay, it's coming down. Now, to put even July in perspective, we had 892,000 or 89,000 new job openings in the month of July. I'm sorry, 8,922 job openings in July. We still were at the same level with unemployment. So we still have this huge gap because we had 6.1 million people on unemployment. Holding true coming into August, I personally thought maybe we'd still see a decline. But no, here we go. The jobs market is driving where we're going. So we came back up to this 9 million. 690,000 of those jobs were new jobs. And the resounding question that I get over and over again is, where were they? This month in August, 509,000. So more than the lion's share were in business services. So does that mean tech came back up? Since they're counted in there, part of tech is counted under business services, but we do know that business services saw the largest increase by far. The unemployment rate stayed at 3.8%. So we're in this reasonable yet unreasonable jobs economy. And that's one of the reasons that we're having this conversation today, to try to take a look at what is the new world of work. Does anybody remember the term Great Resignation? Because now what we're saying is the so-called quits rate. So that's the number of resignations as compared to the total employment number was 2.3 in August. That's the second month in a row that it's lowered a bit, and that's down from the peak of 3% in April. I think what's important about this 2.3 number is that this takes us back to pre-pandemic times. So the quit rate, although the turnover rate is different, the quit rate has come down to a more, I wouldn't call it a reasonable number. I don't think it was reasonable pre-pandemic. And I think the reasons for quitting are different now, but we are seeing numbers like we saw pre-pandemic. Which leads us to our next big indicator, which is raises. So as we're coming up on 2024, there's a lot of different polls going on. What I've done is taken information from different periodicals and then from Mercer and from what I'm hearing from the government and a lot of other analysts put this together. And what we're seeing as a whole is that employers are saying they expect to see an average pay increase in 2024 of 3.9%. So for our CHROs, our talent leaders that are on the call, if you're wondering what your number looks like for increases next year, 3.9 is what we're hearing from the average. Conference Board also chimed in with that, and that's a number from Mercer as well. And that is compared to the 4.1 increase that we saw in 2023. Nothing like the increases that we saw in 2022, and just a down a tick, I'd say, from what we're seeing in 2023. I think a lot of that has to do with the resignation. I also think AI has a lot to do with that, and that's a topic for another webinar. We're not going to touch too much today on AI, and I'll give you a sneak peek. Next month, Reimagine, this particular webinar, will also be hosted with HR.com, that one event. We'll be presenting Reimagining Talent Acquisition via AI. So that there'll be an hour dedicated specifically to AI and reimagining. Also, Maury has just returned from the HR Tech Conference. I think, in a few minutes, she may be able to enlighten us with what she saw as the yeses and the nos. And I know there were some really interesting projections that you're making, Maury. So I'm kind of on the edge of my seat to hear more about that and have the team hear about it. There's one other item I really want to bring up because, if you're following us, you probably have bought into the new world of work. You understand how we need to reimagine and how talent acquisition, as well as talent, all of HR, really needs to step up to the plate, in my opinion, and have a voice in what's going on because the jobs economy is affecting us so much, right? Well, I'm happy to say that Claudia Golden, I'm not sure if anybody else is, I'm just going to skip over and show you her picture. If you haven't seen her, and you haven't heard about this, you need to, because it's really, really great news for women. So on Monday, or actually on October 10th, Claudia Golden received the Nobel Prize in economics, only the third woman to receive a Nobel Prize in economics, and her work is all about women in the workplace. Amazing. So for the ladies on here, we did it. For the men, thanks for participating and having a part of this. Her work is extremely interesting. I think she started in the 60s. She's 77 years old now, and brings her information all the way to date. She's got troves of data. If you follow her, I'm sure that there's a lot of illuminating stories. She talks about the history, but mostly she talks about women's job market experience. So I think it would be negligent of us in the talent field not to take a look at her work. Frankly, I was surprised. I think she's a really well-kept secret. She obviously is a part of the Harvard team with a lot of good information for us. So Ray Women, right? So let's get on to today's topic. And I'm actually, if you have not seen this before, this is the Edelman Work Trust Barometer. I mentioned this on our last webinar. If you're not familiar with Edelman, every year for the past 23 years, they've done what is called the Trust Barometer. So the Trust Barometer measures the world's population's trust in 4 entities: in the government, in non-government entities, in business, and in media. Since 2018, and this is global, by the way, the entire world has changed their focus on who they trust. Media is at the bottom rung. Behind that is government, then NGOs. By a landslide, over 70% of individuals are saying they trust the leadership of their business, of their job, to advocate for them. And they trust them more with their money, with where they're going, with where the economy is going, than government, and certainly more than media. So if you don't follow the Edelman Trust Barometer, it comes out in January. Absolutely. Actually, January, February, it's presented every year at Davos. Take a look. Maury, did you have something to say before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, the number is stunning, but you wonder how much of that, given that people were given 4 choices and they don't trust government right now, they don't trust it. Was it the only one left? It doesn't mean they wildly trust their employer, but given their other choices, they trust it. I think the data is interesting, but I think it may be the lesser of all evils, possibly.
That's a very interesting perspective. I would look, though, at the history, because prior to 2018, the bulk of the trust was in government.
Mm-hmm.
So through that particular administration for those 4 years, the trust was very high in government. So if we go back and we look, we can see who they're polling, exactly who they're talking to. It's pretty transparent. And I will say this information being presented at Davos, and I believe at the World Economic Forum, has an impact on what leadership believes and thinks. Yeah. So a subset of the Edelman Trust Barometer is the Edelman Work Barometer, and that's what we're looking at right now. This is one of the catalysts for our webinar today. So based on the Trust Barometer, we're hearing that most people, in fact, 93%, believe that young workers, Gen Z, are influencing today's work for them. More than 60% of employees, just give you guys a minute, 60% of employees say they're more willing to pressure their employers to change things they do not like, and are more open to unions because of the influence of younger coworkers.
But
pretty
Christine,
incredible.
When you go to this slide, I don't know if you can freeze this slide, but it's not, the work-life boundaries is clearly having a huge impact on everything. But when you look at the other things where Gen Z is influencing them, it's openness to tech. We're not at all surprised about that because we've been talking about digital natives forever. But desire for career success. You know, we're sort of balancing that with people saying, you know, I mean, we'll talk about this whole lazy girl, but how is it that Gen Z is inspiring older workers for more career success? I find that fascinating how they're inspiring older workers. I would have expected it to go the other way. The work-life balance piece doesn't surprise me at all, but the career success one really did pull me up short.
Well, that's why we have Gabrielle on, right? Because I think the term lazy girl jobs is kind of misleading. I see it more as an advocacy, getting to know Gabrielle a little bit and her position, and some other people some other influencers in the Gen Z space. So I want to move on and get that conversation going. And a good precursor for that, Maury, is this TikTok that Gabrielle did. I'm hoping you can hear this, but I think this kind of brings a little bit of an answer to your question.
That's above my pay grade.
Sir, not that they're asking me, what's your advice to the next House Speaker?
That's above my pay grade.
Sir, not that they're asking me, what's your advice
Above
to
his
the
pay
next
grade.
House Speaker?
Which I personally found quite comical, because that is certainly, if you follow Gabrielle and some of the other influencers about lazy girl jobs, that's one of the resounding themes. It's above my pay grade. Oh, it's after 9 o'clock. So obviously, Maury, we're getting an idea of where Maury is. Gabrielle, let me just turn the sound off for you. Gabrielle, tell us about you. Tell us about how this came to be for you and what your perception is at this point in the world of work.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me on. So, Lazy Girl Jobs is super exciting. It's super fun. We'll get into the whole shebang of it. The cool thing is that the future of work is going to look very different. I know that AI is a separate conversation you're having in a different webinar, but there's all these like innovation and disruptors that are happening over the next 10 to 20 years, which is super exciting to see. Gen Z is super interested in an alternative way of working. And so I think that we understand, when you start to understand where they come from and what they've experienced in the workplace in the first few years of even being in the workplace, if they're even in the workplace yet, I think it'll make more sense as we go.
So tell us about that. What has been the experience in your opinion of Gen Z getting into the workforce, coming in through a pandemic?
Yeah, so there's this huge curiosity of discerning from unnecessary work. So I think a lot of times what happens is when I talk about lazy girl jobs or something like that, it makes it seem like I'm telling people not to work or to not go above and beyond, things like that. It's much more of a response to David Graeber's Bullshit Job. So if you ever read that book, that's a super interesting book. It started off from like a very viral news article he did about 10 years ago, made a whole book out of it. Basically, the TLDR is he has these 4 buckets of what unnecessary work is, and the effects that it has on a society as a collective as a whole, and what we basically where we got today. So Gen Z is looking at a lot of unnecessary work, and they're going, so it only takes X amount of hours to get my true job done, where I don't have any types of performance improvement plans happening at my job, things like that. Say it only takes 20 hours, say it only takes 30 hours. There's this lack of understanding why they should do extra work if there isn't any like pay raises, promotions, things like that we're supposed to attach our career success to traditionally.
So can you give me an example of, maybe I would call it old-fashioned here, out of scope? What are examples of things that you might be asked to do that wouldn't be considered part of a job?
A huge concept is, I know that there's so many terms now that we have to keep up with thanks to social media, but a huge one is quiet hiring. So an example of that is like basically adding more job responsibilities that are beyond what was given on the actual job scope when applying for a job. So an example of this could look like sales taking on customer success roles while the customer success team is like trimmed by the fat, is typically like the conversation that's talked about with layoffs, stuff like that. Or the marketing team taking on sales things as they reduce the sales team, things like that. And so Gen Z is like very privy to these conversations. And so they look at that and they go, if you're getting a buy one, get one on labor here, I shouldn't have to overextend myself. If you're trying to find a deal, there should be more of a compromise and a conversation. And that's a harsh conversation. That's a harsh truth. And I understand that. I think that especially if you're, have been in the workplace for a while, you're looking at Gen Z and going, well, that's how the world works. So like, where do you expect to go in your career? Gen Z is looking for an honest conversation. What's happening right now is a lot of shutting down. A lot of conversations aren't happening. Gen Z, one, feels uncomfortable having these conversations. There's lack of representation in the workplace today because I'm probably the oldest Gen Z. We're only 26. There's just not a lot of us in the workplace yet. 2, a lot of what we want is not really celebrated today. So we're worried about leadership not being excited about what we want to talk about, things like that. And I'm sure, why a lot of people are in this webinar today is like, what does Gen Z actually want? They're not really speaking up in the workplace. So conversations over time that are very authentic and very safe can fix these issues that are going on.
So, Gabrielle,
So
let
Gen
me
Z
just
feels
ask,
like they don't have a voice. Go ahead, Maury, sorry.
oh, I just gonna ask you to clarify. So you're saying if people only have, if they can do their job in 50% of the time, then you're seeing if they're being asked to take on, say, customer success or something, as that not being legitimate work to ask them to do if their core responsibilities aren't a full day of work and they're asked to doing other work. Help me understand what the difference is there.
So basically, if the job takes X amount of hours, right? So that's already contracted. It's very, very similar to like a freelance conversation. And I do have criticism with Gen Z. Sometimes when they look at some future of work asks that they have, I'm like, that's a freelancer. So like, you should just go be a freelancer. But technically they're going, if I can get, my work done in 4 days a week, then I should be only doing my work 4 days a week. And they want that type of conversation, that type of flexibility. Now there's very, very, I don't want to say successful, but let's say motivated people that are still Gen Z that want to take on extra work and extra learning opportunities. I'm not saying that just Gen Z only wants work-life balance in this one specific way, but typically that's a conversation that Gen Z would like to ask their workplace, but feels like they can't.
Yeah, I don't think they're alone in that. One of the things there was on the Edelman Trust at Work webinar, there was a young lady, do you remember her name? I don't remember her name, but she is the founder of Gen Z VC. And the statement she made, I think I shared this with you, Maury, is, every generation goes through this. I'm coming into the workforce. What's this going to be like? Although I will say when I came into the workforce, it was like, you knew you were going to work like a Trojan no matter what they gave you, because that's how you got ahead. That's exactly how you got ahead. So I think, and I like the fact, looking at, what the points that you're making, Gabrielle, and what Gen Z is saying, hey, I want to know what that's about, and asking questions about it. We kind of like went blindly into it, right? And I think that might be indicative of how we're seeing the world of work change, period. But there's a lot of questions as a business owner myself, and having been in, before I opened the company, been in the corporate world, starting out in the corporate world, it really means changing not just how the business runs, but how the C-suite and middle management view things. It's a big lift. Obviously, we have to pay attention to it. But just going back to what you said, her point, this young woman's point from Gen Z VC was, all generations have had this, but they haven't had the voice to bring it forward.
Right.
I'd love to hear what the panel says about that, and anybody in the audience.
We've seen there are big generational shifts too, because when baby boomers, got out of school, there were so many of us that a lot of all the extra work was just to get noticed, because you were one, I was one of 140 people hired at P&G as a brand assistant. So I had to distinguish myself. And then the problem was those baby boomers grew up to be managers, and they still needed to get themselves noticed for promotions, because we all understand the pyramid. So there was a lot of criticism among, Gen Xers that I'm being asked to work on projects that I know are never going to go forward. And my boss is just doing it so they'll have something to talk about. So they'll have some initiative. We all know it's not going to get funded. This is just stupid work. I shouldn't have to do it. And they weren't wrong. I mean, there was a lot of that baby boomer managers had their subordinates or their teams do work that they understood was just going to get trashed at the end of the day. And now we're seeing another level of that. So there's always been pushback against doing work that wasn't really going to lead to anything productive. I think Gen Z is probably being much more vocal about it, in saying that this is crazy. Why am I spending all this time doing work that's not really going to produce anything? And we saw a little bit of that in the trust report as well. People being dissatisfied with doing work that didn't have purpose and didn't lead to anything. So, the speaking up about it is absolutely great. The flip side to that is it did expand your expertise. If you worked on a project, you need all the research for it, you put together the presentation, and it never got forwarded or any of that. You know, it could feel like, oh, what a complete waste, except you develop some expertise and you learn something. And that's, I think, the question that's tough for everyone is, at what point do you stop and say, if I can do the productive work that's really going to move my job forward, that I feel good about, that I think is contributing, I can do that in 4 days. What do I do with that 5th day? You know, how much do I invest in my own career and my own expertise in adding things? And how much do I do more non-work, throwaway work, which none of us want to do? Gabrielle, is that a fair kind of assessment about what you're seeing?
The extra 5th day you can do with whatever you want. That's the exciting part. So we're seeing a really, really big curiosity in what life looks like when it's not work-centered. And so that's like true, like a new iteration of work-life balance, right? So instead of a work-life balance conversation where millennials started, where it's like, you know, you have a dentist appointment, you can take a long lunch instead of taking PTO, and that's work-life balance. There's a whole other iteration to it now where it's like, what does it look like when I truly, truly decenter my success metrics from a promotion, right? So the context, the historical context that you gave should not be ignored, right? Of how work started with baby boomers. But what has happened is all those assumptions are going off of a promotion. We're going to see a huge, huge bucket or gap with Gen Z as they further enter the workplace of true careerists, right? And they could look like the traditional structure, and people that aren't necessarily careerists, and they're not looking to actually like move the needle in a traditional way. And so with that unnecessary work or these unnecessary jobs, things like that, that's a conversation where, you know, are people going to adapt these unnecessary jobs to have more work-life balance? To, no offense to yoga, I love yoga, but like go be a yoga instructor outside of work, or like whatever the heck they want to, that calls to their heart? Or are you actually going to attract like the most ambitious, you know, talent for these other jobs that are compensated correctly, scoped out correctly, right? And I'm speaking in a utopian world, right? And I can definitely call that out, but also doing the best work every single time, 100% of, you know, from 9 to 5, 100% of the time doesn't always lead to a promotion or what we want to. So that's also a utopian conversation.
But it was, until recently, the
For
only.
sure. Absolutely.
Didn't guarantee it. So let me ask you something, because this is what I hear from a lot of people that are in the workforce long. Where are these people getting money? Which to me equates to, obviously Gen Z feels more empowered because they have a voice. They don't seem to have a concern about the blowback from that could come from a potential employer. So arguably, this whole machine of work that we have is because people want to have money, right? So
Yeah.
although Gen Z seems pretty fearless, what do you think enables the Gen Z generation to feel like they don't have to have as much concern about
In the future? So that's a really, really cool question. So typically, I mean, this is how I operated my lead sequel job, right? So we could talk about, hey, I want to hit 6 figures a year, right? That's a great number when it was like 2021 today, right? We've talked about, there's so many studies now where 100K obviously isn't that much money today, but in 2021, that was exciting. That was attractive, right? So I could get
live. Still way above
sure.
the average mean, right?
For sure. That's a good call out. So I could get, you know, a full-time job that pays 60% of that a month or something like that. And then I could also have this side hustle that does that, right? So it's more of an attraction towards a career portfolio per se than like a ladder. So that's where a lot of ambitious talent is going to go if there isn't any change in these like other crazy concepts that Gen Z wants to talk about, which is like a whole other conversation. So that's a new way, right? Like I can start a business today and not have to save up money for like a radio ad that I have to save up to like market my business, right? Like I can just post organic content, things like that. So there's this huge, huge curiosity of gig work. And that started honestly from the tech boom of like Uber and things like that. Like this has been fed to us for a long time. If that's actually equitable long term is like a other conversation that we could get into of like earned income versus passive income, whole other thing. So like that's a way that Gen Z sees this stuff, right? So if they look at work and they're frustrated at certain things, they can go, I can take the gas pedal off and I can make money elsewhere over here. That's where their money's coming from.
But not everybody can do that. If you're college educated, I hate to say to some degree, if you're white, if you live in an area where their opportunities are there, that's all true. But I think we need to keep in mind for a lot of our population, they can't just go pick up gig work. I mean, there are people that are out of work that can't get anything right now. Now, granted, there's skills and limitations, and Christine, as you showed, you know, we still have a gap between number of jobs and number of people looking for work. But you know, and Gabrielle, as you've mentioned, you're talking sort of utopian where everybody's skills are immediately transferable and jobs appear when you need the cash for them and so forth. The reality is, and maybe I'm biased, I'm in New York, right? And so I'm surrounded by lots of people who, you know, are telling Christine yesterday, you know, the person who works at my Subway sandwich shop, they would love to have a, you know, a portfolio career and go grab other things. And there just aren't those opportunities available to them necessarily. So some people absolutely can do it. I think we need to keep in mind that those opportunities aren't available to everyone.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a same conversation too with like climbing the corporate ladder, right? So all these conversations can happen at the same time where it's like promotions aren't always available. So like maybe let's not attach to that 100%. Gig work may not always be available. Let's not attach to that 100%, stuff like that. Gen Z is very fluid. Like you have to remember too, like our brains aren't fully developed. Doesn't develop till we're like 25. Like you have to think about like
these you are.
yeah, like honestly, you know, like sometimes I think Gen Z gets held to this like super high standard, and it's like we do have like majority of them are teenagers, right? And they're still in that self-discovery phase.
Right. And I think the question is, and by the way, I love it. I love that Gen Z has a voice. I love that Gen Z is influencing the workforce. I just, I think we need to have more sessions like this so people can sound it out, because it is different. And really, you know, when I'm at the bottom end, the last year baby boomers, I'm telling my age away, but, and my kids are Gen X, right? So there's these ingrained beliefs, like just like you're coming up with these beliefs that things are fluid and I can change things. The beliefs that we came up with is if you aren't working your butt off, you aren't worthwhile.
Yeah.
And really the sense of worth came from that. And organizations maybe capitalized on that. But, you know, and I see we have a couple of questions we're going to want to get to too. And while we're doing it, I want to post something to the group. I want to ask how many people feel as though if they came up through the Gen Z ranks, would they still take the same course? And that Gabrielle is talking about. What if you had those kind of liberties when you were starting out, if you're older in the workforce? And then the other question, and we talked about this on the last Reimagine, is if you're a leader, a boss, a manager of any type right now, are you the same boss today that you were 10 years ago? And any comment that you have to say about that. So Jess, you want to go to the questions we have, and I'd love to hear what anybody else in the audience has to say about that.
Sure. So someone asked for Gabrielle to clarify, if you propose moving to a 4-day work week, are you expecting to be compensated for a full 40-hour work week?
No, that's time theft.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And then this second question.
Hang on a second, Jess. So let me just see how this would work. We hire somebody, they come in and they say, don't expect me to do 5 days. I've been doing this for a month. I can do it in 4. Do I then cut their salary?
That should be a conversation, right? So it's something that should be available in the future, especially I personally, and this is like a huge extreme opinion that I have, but I think the full-time 9-to-5 40-hour work week will not be as prevalent in the next 10 to 20 years, especially with the rise of AI and things like that. So I think people will be more interested in a 4-day work week and taking a pay cut for that. We're also seeing underemployment be super popular, especially since the Great Resignation. So for people who don't understand underemployment, it's intentionally taking a job where you have more human capital than what the job actually requires of you. And inherently taking a pay cut. I did that in 2021 to teach myself how to be what I am today.
Christine, can I jump in, just building off your last comment that I think started with probably millennials, and I think Gen Z is raising this awareness as well. There's no doubt that the baby boomers, looked at work as an obligation, something that you worked, you valued your career over almost anything else. I mean, I hope most of us valued family more, but it was all consuming. There's no two ways about it. You went ahead and you ground the axe all the time. But I think what we're coming around to seeing, and this pendulum is going to swing back and forth, is I think work was demonized because people got into jobs, whether they liked them or not, whether they got satisfaction out of them or not, they felt obligated. They had to keep grinding away because that's what was expected of them. But when you can back off a little bit and understand that for many people, work can be a source of intellectual challenge. It can be a source of satisfaction. It can be a source of community, if properly. It can be something very positive. And I think out of these extremes of, no, you have to do nothing but work, to the other of, I'm going to do as little work as possible. If we stop demonizing work and saying, this is another human activity that can potentially give us things we need beside a paycheck. Yes, we could all go and work at a minimum wage job that had no intellectual challenge and only work a certain number of hours a week and go out and do something else. But there's a middle ground there that says, I mean, you mentioned, I just came back from HR Tech, which is a grueling, 4 days of being on an exhibit hall floor that most people hate. And to be honest, I love because I come alive, because I've got friends in the industry, because I like learning about new technology that's out there. I like seeing people reposition and so forth. For me, it's just, intellectual stimulation. It's intellectual candy for me. And a lot of people hate it because it's a grudge. You got to stand at your exhibit hall and talk to people you don't want to talk to. So there's one of the really, really good things I think coming out of this questioning of work is to get out of this mindset that work is something you have to do to get a paycheck, to get promoted, to get more money, and re-looking at where are we getting our sense of satisfaction? Where are we getting the kind of positive mental, stimuli that we need? When you look at what happened during COVID, when many people stopped working because they couldn't go to the office or so forth, the increase in mental health issues, the increase in substance abuse issues, the increase in domestic violence, it wasn't good for us to be trapped in our houses with nothing to do. We are both intellectually curious beings and we are social beings. And this balance between where we get all of that stimulation, I think it's healthy that we're rethinking that. And I think employers are going to have to rethink that. I think employees are going to have to rethink that. But
I think that's the question.
That's what comes out.
I agree that the workforce is changing, but how, and I think that our participants in particular on this webinar want to know, okay, so how am I supposed to do that as an employer? First off, how do I? And then, what do I want to do? How do I do it is another story, which is why I asked that other question, right? So how do you take a large organization or a small organization even? It's easier in smaller organizations, right? When we talk about large, I've worked with many large organizations that say, okay, this is the direction we're going in right now. And they have 300,000 employees. So they jump into this and this is who we are and this is what we're doing. And the trickle down takes years. So it's this misinformation is shared about the organization as they kind of grapple with how do we take this big boat and change it into a kinder, friendlier manager situation. And that's up to my friend at the manager method to figure out. But interesting. Jess, we have more questions.
Yes. So someone had asked, as an employer that's possibly looking to capitalize on what this Gen Z is looking for as far as a lazy girl job, what type of industry or position would be the best fit for this so they can understand, eventually taking the lazy girl concepts and using that as an employer branding and marketing for some of these positions that would actually work with that and be a good fit for these people looking for these qualities.
Just so I'm understanding the question correctly, are they asking what specific industries are lazy girl job friendly
Yes.
for employee branding?
Yeah, so they want to capitalize on people that are looking for lazy girl jobs, and they may not know
Very cool.
if they have a lazy girl job or not available.
Very cool. So I could see that going two ways. So either they're super excited about it and they want to do an employee branding route, or they're misinterpreting what it is and they're trying to audit internally if they have lazy girl jobs. That's like a whole other conversation. Not that I'm saying that this person is doing that at all. I've just seen that starting to happen. So I wanted to highlight that. Lazy girl jobs isn't a specific job. It's not a specific job title, because really all I'm doing is I'm talking about work-life balance. I'm talking about salary requirements. I'm packaging what we already talk about today in work, right? Like how you feel at work, if you're, working in the office or not, how much you're making, the balance that you have, right? And I just packaged it into like a cutesy lazy girl job trend, but it's more of like a mindset, right? So if you can find jobs that like fit into those buckets, that's a really, really awesome thing. And you should be, really being like vocal about that. It's going to do super well in the Gen Z talent pool. I hope that answers your question.
So are there any companies that you've seen advertising for jobs that you think would catch the attention of someone looking for that? And I know it's not a specific job, it's a mindset, but someone that's, one of your followers or proponent of lazy girl jobs.
Yeah, so that's that's such a cool conversation too, of like, because talent acquisition has way more knowledge on this than I will. The whole history of a job description and how that will change in the future is a huge other conversation that we could talk about, but really it's in the job description. So typically if there's, Gen Z likes to call it red flags. There's lots of like names that we have for everything, but if there's like red flags in the job description, that's not a lazy girl job. So it's much more like that way, where it's like if there's certain things like must be able to work in a dynamic environment, things like that. Typically that's kind of our radar of being like, oh, we're going to have to wear a lot of hats and I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to go for that job. So that's one way, right? So I'm talking more about like the what not to do. The what to do is being like super, super clear in the job description, right? So there's a lot of things too where it'll be like all and any other duties, any other duties assigned, things like that. That's super, super frustrating and super scary for Gen Z to go down that route. Because what if in 90 days when we train, we realize we don't like this job? Either we stay and become a disgruntled employee, which doesn't help anyone, doesn't help the employer, doesn't help the employee, or we have to quit our job and now find another job, or balance getting a new job while maintaining your job. So it leaves us at a lot of risk. And so since there's so many choices now for what jobs even look like, Gen Z is a lot more discerning about what they want in the job description.
Okay. Any comments on that? Christine, you're on mute.
Sorry, hard to believe I'm on mute. Interesting that you should bring that up. There's been a lot in the press lately, and I'll also post that out to the audience about the effect of the job description. I think word of caution, because this is the world that we live in. Jess in particular, Jess isn't here to run enough, but she's our director of process engineering. She runs the implementation teams, and she also runs our consulting side of the house. So we very seldom come into an organization and their job descriptions don't need to be readdressed, right? The thing about the job description, and going back to the statement that I made a few minutes ago, is that a lot of times job descriptions come in with well-intention, but it's not even really what the hiring manager does, enter Maury. So Maury's technology allows the hiring manager to record who they really are, right? So that's one really good plus there. And I'm seeing, some terminology specific to job descriptions, like intent-based job descriptions or talent-based job descriptions. So really starting to delve into that more, and you're welcome to reach out to us here at People Science about that, and certainly Maury about her technology. And I do want to get to the questions. Before I do that, Maury, you brought up a really good point about projecting based on some of the things that you saw in AI that I think is so relevant to the entire job market and to the attendees. Can you just kind of explain that to us the way you did to me? Yeah. You kept me up all night with this. It's been going through my brain.
Okay. One of the really interesting things, everybody at HR Tech was talking about AI. But one of the interesting things going on right now is that there are products out there like Auto Apply AI, where I understand you can upload a job description. You can upload a job description and your resume and ask AI to rewrite your resume to apply for that job and then go automatically apply for it. And what it will do is it will take the keywords out of the job description and put it into the application. So for everyone who knows how an ATS works, primarily when recruiters go into their ATS to look at all the applications, they're doing a keyword search. They're trying to find people who in their resumes or in their applications have the keywords. Well, if AI has now altered every single application to include all of the keywords, then every single application is going to be a match, which means that the ATS is going to be completely unusable. There are other AI tools that will do things like guarantee you that they will apply to up to 2,000 jobs daily. And just think of the numbers about that, because it means everybody's ATS is going to get swamped. It's going to go out there and it's you apply to enough jobs, one of them's bound to hit. So at the end of the week, you've applied to 10,000 jobs. If you're out of work for several months, you've swamped almost every ATS out there. So employers might be seeing 1 million applicants for any given job, for every given job in their organizations, and all of them are unsearchable because all of them have the keywords, which means our entire process is going to implode. When you can't differentiate between any of the applications, it gets pretty hard to move forward, and no recruiter can begin to review 1 million applications. And try to read through it. And people are saying, well, AI will fix that. Well, yeah, we've got an arms race going on with AI's applying. Well, AI is going to try to, block the AI. Well, the AI is going to figure out how the AI is blocking it, and up we go. So the whole issue of job descriptions, and realize job descriptions are generally legal compliance documents. They should not be job advertisements. They should not be what you're putting out in front of candidates to say, are you interested in doing this? There's a time and a place where an actual compliance document should come into play. But in terms of attracting people, you shouldn't have legal writing your job descriptions or compliance writing them. And so often that's what happens.
Well, they come in afterwards and wreck them. Compliance comes in afterwards. And I've seen situations where, you spent countless hours, thousands of dollars. Compliance comes in and says, just red lines everything.
Right. I just mentioned that I started my career at Procter & Gamble. It's a little bit like taking the usage instructions on the back of the box and saying, here, buy this laundry soap. Usage instructions have their place, but it's not what attracts people. So the question is,
but I don't think it's going to matter, because if everybody applies to AI, we're going to have so many candidates, we won't be able to see the forest for the trees. And, I think that I'm really looking forward to this presentation that we're going to be doing on the November 18th about this, because if we don't get ahead of this in TA, right? So what we saw during the pandemic was, oh my God, I'm not able to hire for my ATS. There aren't enough valid, people with the credentials I need, right? So many organizations, and particularly the ones that we work with, always needed a search engine. And those companies were ahead of the game. And then the organizations that won't overhired a lot of people, not everybody, but they overhired a lot of people in TA. So where they might have had 2 sourcers, they now went to 60. That's one organization I'm talking about. And then that didn't work because now they have like a myriad of different things going on at the same time. And then that negates the internal referrals, and it negates, because there's four ways to find a person. Someone who's referred, which is typically over 30% of the jobs come from someone who's been referred. Internal movement, so somebody internally who wants the job. Candidates who apply, which, by the way, the ATS starts when the candidate applies. It's not tracking all your data, which is why a lot of people hate them, because you want them to do more than they do. But really, they start at the applicant, and they were never designed to screen candidates. So they're kind of at the mercy of AI, right? And then there's sourcing for candidates. We, as talent acquisition leaders, human resource leaders, need to look at that and really pinpoint, what is my market? And if my market is definitely going to be Gen Z, if I'm here for, how am I approaching them? What does that look like? And come up, reimagine your strategy. Right now, we're completely reactive. We put a post up and they come in and that's who we hire. And oh, by the way, here's my cousin's uncle's brother and we hire him. We need to look at the whole pool. We need to decide what the pool is and we need to limit the pool.
Mhm.
We need to set those parameters. And that is what I believe will change the candidate experience. It is horrible to be a candidate right now. I mean, you're just applying all these here, and I come on every month and tell you how many jobs are open. You know how many people message me and say, yeah, where's my job? Like I've applied to 230 positions. I haven't heard back from anybody. So
It's always been awful, Christine. It's never been wonderful to be a candidate.
It's awful. It's awful. But
it's
I think
dreadful. But I think we're moving, and I think we're moving to a place of greater transparency. Whether it's the laws about pay transparency of telling candidates up front, here's what this job pays. If this is not what you're looking for, then don't apply because this job may pay $60,000 a year. If you want 100, it's not for you. I think that's, we've got to give candidates information they want. It's the reason we're so big on video. Put a hiring manager in there. Here's who you're going to work for. Here's the environment you're going to work in if it's an on-site job. Provide more information so candidates can make good decisions. I mean, part of the reason the process is so awful is candidates are expected to apply blindly with job descriptions that don't really tell them what they're going to do and no other good information. So they apply to things they're grossly unqualified for, things that they're grossly uninterested in. And it does become a numbers game that's a huge waste of time and energy for both sides.
If you simplify it and you bring it down to, I'll use dating as an example. Hate me though, you may have to use it as an example. If you go out and you start dating people and you don't know yourself and you don't know what it is you really want, what are the chances you're going to meet the right person? Companies like people have tons of neurosis. They all do. Oh, we know that.
Right.
Thank you, because it's all over the place, right? So if I don't know my own neurosis and I haven't mastered that, and I just okay, bring me people, which happens, right? And I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen. We work with a lot of startups. Having started this company myself, you got to hire who you can hire to get the work done. But when we're working on talent acquisition and looking at how we're doing this, we really need to say who's our fit. And I have seen this. It's been very, very successful for many organizations that we work with. As soon as you get myopic on what you want, that's what you advertise to, that's what you attract, and that's the lane that you stay in. Do I know anybody who's like 100% on it? No. But I have seen that be the solution to this crazy new world of work. We got to get to questions because we're running out of time. Go ahead, Jeff.
So someone asked this question for the panel. How do you address Gen Z employees who have no true work experience, but seek to make six figures coming just out of college? So Maury, to your point, do you just tell them this job's not for you or?
Yeah. There's a reality to that. I talked to someone the other day, wanted to come to work for SparcStart. Their base salary requirements were $500,000. I said, I appreciate your skills. I appreciate you have a lot of experience. This is just not the right job for you. Like we don't pay $500,000 salaries even for senior level positions. So there's a transparency and there's an honesty here. And I think employers have made a big mistake, particularly hide it in salary. Let's play them along. Let's see if we can really get them excited about the opportunity. And then, we're going to tell them the salary is half what they think they're going to make. What a huge waste of human effort on both sides. I think there's a real need for honesty. And, I will give credit to millennials and to some extent Gen Z for kind of calling out. It's like, let's stop playing the games here. Let's tell people, here's what's expected of them. Here's what we're paying. And if that makes sense to you, let's have an adult conversation here about you using your skills to do this job at this pay rate. And if it's not right for you, no hard feelings. We're all grownups here. Great. Move on to something that is right for you.
Gabrielle, do you see that happening a lot? Do you know a lot of people in your bracket that are saying, I want a lot more money than they're paying. I'm worth a lot more than this. Are you, by the way, I remember that when I went to work, we still have it, right? It's certainly not new.
This is not new. Absolutely. So what I say with that is be super honest with your employer and expect the same honesty back. And if you can't get it there, then how else do you adapt to the goals that you want, right? But like that one employer that you've decided to work with for however X amount of years that you were envisioning to is not always privy to like answering your requests with salaries and stuff like that, right? So you can negotiate, you can request, you can remind your subordinate or your you know, any type of like manager,
Upline
sorry.
manager.
Yeah, totally just died right there. Any type of like higher up that you have, right? Any type of decision maker of that's your goal, that's what you want to make, right? But you don't get to just demand things, right? Like that's the point of you working for someone else versus for yourself. So yeah, that's something that I call out a lot with Gen Z too, where it's like I look at some of these like really nuanced things that they want in work, right? They want to work on only what they want to work on when exactly they want to at exactly the same rate. I'm like, that's a freelancer. So that's a separate conversation.
Ah.
Yeah. So
So
sometimes
you
like
consider that a freelancer? That's interesting.
yeah,
Because I
right.
think there's a misnomer out there. Right? I've heard
I
it from a
think
lot of
that
people. All Gen Z thinks is, I'm only going to do the work I want. I'm
right.
going to get paid a lot of money because there's a big demand. And if you don't like it, I'll just leave and do something else. And I really think that
Kind of
that's a
moving
theme that
towards
we
that.
hear out there. But I think it's
Right.
interesting when you say that's a freelancer, because that doesn't matter if you're Gen Z, X, Boomer, not anybody who's a freelancer does think and operate that way. I think that it's generalization to say that, you know, to kind of just assume that that's what all of Gen Z is like, or that's what we
Right.
mean by lazy girl jobs.
Right. And that's where I think the traditional full-time job just really isn't going to look like what it looks like in the next 10 years because of these requests, right? Because you look at what Gen Z wants to its most essence and the most like extreme way that they want it. And it's like, that is a freelancer, right? So do employers meet in the middle at some point in the future? Or does Gen Z just adhere to the current workplace and not make any changes, right? But I do think that there will be some type of hybrid situation in the future where it's more like a freelancer. And of course, with AI and things like that, like we're going to take away a lot of the repetitive tasks, a lot of the busy work anyways, where our actual subject expertise is going to be much more valued than the one-to-one output that we're doing with productivity in the 40 hours that we're working there. So like to your point, Maury, like you were talking about like what does self-exploration look like and stuff like that if we're not interested into work. And I don't really speak on like demonizing work, but I understand how it could be like interpreted that way of like work is bad and you must leave and you should have like a stopwatch of like how long you're there for the day and be like, I've been here 8 hours, goodbye, stuff like that. But it's like there's so many other outlets to find education, right? So like I was born in 1997. So like when I was, you know, a conscious human, not really an adult yet, YouTube was a thing. So I was able to Google anything that I wanted and teach myself for free on YouTube. So while that's not an accredited university, right? Some of those things have taught me things that I can monetize today, right? Stuff like that. So it's like this new change of like what even like education looks like, what even like your human capital looks like. It's fun. I like the conversation.
Awesome.
And-
So we're coming up on time. I want to do final word. So just a quick final word. We'll start with Jess. Final word about today, takeaway.
No, I just think it's been an interesting conversation, definitely understanding the differences between what the generations value in a career and what they're looking for. But most importantly, educating employers and people in TA on, you know, what these upcoming generations that are going to be the majority of our workforce soon are looking for, and being able to adapt and hire towards that and make it a work environment that they want to be in. So thank you both panelists for sharing those thoughts.
Maury, final words?
Yes, I think we all need to recognize these things evolve. And some of it will be Gen Z understanding it doesn't change overnight. And some of it being, you know, sort of the established generation saying it doesn't change overnight, but it must change. And hopefully to a healthier place for all of us. You know, I worry about the extremes on both sides of and saying where is the really constructive, productive place where people can have work-life balance and intellectual stimulation and feel productive and provide, you know, to a society and an economy that needs to thrive, and feel good about that. So there's always going to be this tug back and forth. And as a country that's become so polarized, if you don't think like I think, you must be wrong. You know, let's hope when we talk about work evolving, that we don't demonize the other side. We go, okay, life is evolving. We need to understand there's a different way to think about this. And where's the solution where we can maximize all that's good, instead of looking to pick apart the bad stuff.
I love that. Gabrielle, closing point.
This was so fun. Thank you so much for having me. I think this was a really, really cool example of how conversations can work in the future to better understand Gen Z. I understand that there's a huge, huge interest and a lot of budgets to even get data on what Gen Z feels like and what they want in the workplace moving forward. Having conversations like this is exactly the essence of how to get there. So this webinar and so many other things that I know that this team is doing is so impactful to that conversation. And yeah, thanks for having me on. This was super cool.
Great. I'd like to say thank you to everybody for joining. Thank you for hanging in there. It looks like pretty much everybody stayed on this time, which is good, or a good percentage of people. This is really how you reimagine talent acquisition, to Maury's point and to Gabrielle's point. And of course, you know, Jess and I talk about this all the time. The way that we're going to change things is by collectively working together. If we've learned anything by watching media in the last few years, we know that polarization is not the answer. It's time for us in the talent world to step up and make our mark so that we can help our economies, help our corporations, and the overall good of people. You know, most of us, almost everybody will tell you happy worker, happy life, right? Happy in what you do, happy in your life. Thanks so much for joining. Just reminding me, I got the date wrong. It's actually Wednesday, November 15th is our next webinar. It's Reimagining Talent Acquisition with AI. It's more like a workshop. You'll get announcements, of course. Sign up. It's really, you know, it's also sponsored by HR.com. It's free. It'll prompt you to become a member of HR.com, but it is a free membership. So I look forward to seeing everybody. Gabrielle, thank you so much. Maury, thank you so much. Jess, as always, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks.
Thank you.